The roar of the crowd still echoed in Darius Keller's ears as he stood in the center of the blood-soaked arena, his sword pointed at the throat of the orc girl trembling before him. She could not have been more than 19 summers, her green skin streaked with dirt and sweat, small tusks barely visible as her mouth hung open in ragged breaths. Her weapon had fallen from her grasp moments ago, and now she knelt in the sand with her amber eyes fixed on his blade, waiting for the death stroke that tradition demanded he deliver. The crowd screamed for blood, their voices a savage wave crashing against the stone walls of the Colosseum, but Darius found himself unable to move, unable to complete the killing blow that would secure his victory. He had killed before in this wretched place, too many times to count. Men, beasts, and yes, even orcs. But those had been warriors, hardened fighters who had chosen this path or at least understood the brutal rules of the arena. This girl looked as though she had been thrown into the pit against her will, her armor ill-fitting and her fighting style desperate rather than trained. She had fought bravely, he would give her that, but there had been terror in every swing of her blade, and when he had finally disarmed her, he had seen something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Not just fear of death, but a profound sadness, as though she had already accepted her fate long before stepping onto the sand. The crowd's chanting grew louder, more insistent. Kill, kill, kill. The word pounded through the air like a war drum, and Darius felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. He was their champion, their killer, the man who had survived 43 bouts in this cursed arena. They wanted their spectacle, their blood sacrifice to cap off the afternoon's entertainment. But as he looked down at the orc girl, at the way her shoulders shook and her hands clutched at the sand, he felt something shift inside him. A lifetime of following orders, of doing what was expected, of playing the role of the perfect gladiator suddenly seemed like a chain around his neck. He lowered his sword. The crowd's roar turned to confusion, then to anger. Boos and jeers rained down from the stands, and somewhere above him, he heard the arena master shouting commands. But Darius ignored them all. He looked the orc girl in the eyes and spoke loud enough for the nearest spectators to hear. "I will not kill an unarmed opponent who cannot fight back. This is not combat. This is murder." The girl stared at him in shock, her amber eyes wide with disbelief. She seemed unable to process what was happening, as though mercy was so foreign a concept that her mind could not grasp it. Darius turned away from her and addressed the arena master's box, where the fat merchant who ran these games sat surrounded by his advisors. "I claim my right to refuse a dishonorable kill," Darius called out. It was an obscure rule, one rarely invoked, but it existed in the ancient laws that governed the arena. A gladiator could refuse to execute an opponent if he deemed the kill dishonorable, though it meant forfeiting his winnings from the bout and facing the crowd's displeasure. The arena master's face turned purple with rage, but he was trapped by his own regulations. To deny Darius this right would be to admit that the games were nothing more than savage executions, and that would undermine the thin veneer of honor and sport that kept the nobility attending. After a long moment, the arena master waved his hand in a gesture of disgust. "Take them both out of my sight," he snarled. Guards rushed onto the sand, seizing Darius by the arms and dragging him toward the gate that led beneath the stands. He did not resist. Behind him, he heard more guards collecting the orc girl, and he caught a glimpse of her face as they hauled her away in the opposite direction. She was still staring at him, that same expression of disbelief frozen on her features, as though she had just witnessed something that defied all logic and reason. They threw Darius into his quarters beneath the arena, a small stone cell with a cot, a bucket, and a single narrow window high on the wall. It was more than most gladiators received, a privilege earned through his many victories, but it still felt like a tomb. He sat on the edge of the cot and let his head fall into his hands, exhaustion washing over him now that the rush of combat had faded. His body ached from a dozen small wounds, and his mind felt heavy with the weight of what he had just done. He had made an enemy of the arena master today. That was dangerous. The man had ways of making a gladiator's life miserable, of ensuring that future bouts would be even more brutal and unfair. But even knowing that, Darius could not bring himself to regret his choice. He had seen too much death in this place, had delivered too much of it himself. If he had struck down that girl today, if he had ended her life just to please a bloodthirsty crowd, he felt certain that whatever small piece of humanity he still carried would have died with her. He stripped off his armor and washed the blood from his skin using water from a basin. The afternoon light coming through the window gradually faded to evening, and servants brought him a meal of bread, cheese, and thin soup. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing, his thoughts circling back again and again to the orc girl's face. He wondered what had happened to her. Had they returned her to whatever cell she had come from? Would they force her back into the arena tomorrow, to die at the hands of some other gladiator who would not hesitate to deliver the killing blow? Night fell, and the arena above him grew quiet. The crowds had dispersed, returning to their homes and taverns to discuss the day's entertainment. Darius lay on his cot and stared at the stone ceiling, sleep eluding him despite his exhaustion. His mind would not settle, kept churning with questions and doubts and a strange, nameless anxiety that made his chest feel tight. Hours passed. The moon rose beyond his window, painting a square of silver light on the floor, and then he heard it. A soft sound outside his door, like footsteps trying to be silent. Darius sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for the dagger he kept hidden beneath his pillow. The footsteps stopped, and for a long moment there was only silence. Then came a different sound, breathing. Someone was standing just outside his door. "Who is there?" Darius called out, his voice low but firm. No answer came. The breathing continued, quick and nervous. Darius rose from his cot and crossed to the door. It was not locked from the inside. Gladiators were not considered dangerous enough to warrant such precautions when confined to their quarters, but opening it could be a trap. Still, curiosity and instinct drove him forward. He pulled the door open slowly, peering into the corridor beyond. The orc girl stood in the shadows. She jumped back when the door opened, her whole body tensing as though ready to flee. But she did not run. Instead, she stood there in the flickering torchlight, her green skin seeming to glow faintly in the orange light. She had washed the dirt and blood from her face, and someone had given her a simple gray tunic to replace her torn armor. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable, and Darius found himself momentarily speechless. "You," he finally managed. "How did you get out of your cell?" She did not answer immediately. Her amber eyes darted up and down the corridor, checking to make sure they were alone, before finally settling on his face. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he expected, with a slight rasp that reminded him of someone who had spent too long screaming or crying. "They did not lock it," she said. "They do not think I will try to escape. Where would I go?" It was a fair point. The arena was in the heart of the city, surrounded by walls and guards and a population that would turn on an orc without hesitation. Even if she made it to the streets, she would be hunted down and killed within hours. Darius leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "So instead you came here." "Why?" The girl's hands twisted together in front of her, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with the physical strength evident in her frame. She was not large for an orc, perhaps only an inch or two taller than Darius himself, but her shoulders were broad and her arms corded with muscle. Yet in that moment she looked almost fragile. "I needed to understand," she said quietly. "Why did you spare me?" Darius considered his answer carefully. He could tell her it was principle or mercy or adherence to some code of honor. All of those things were partly true. But looking at her now, seeing the raw need for understanding in her eyes, he found himself speaking a deeper truth. "Because killing you would have been wrong," he said simply. "You were not a warrior. You were a victim. I have taken many lives in that arena, but I draw the line at murder." The orc girl's expression shifted, something like pain crossing her features. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses and scars that marked them. "I was a warrior once," she said softly. "Or I was training to be one, before my clan was destroyed. Before I was captured and sold to the arena masters." "What is your name?" Darius asked. She looked up at him, surprise flickering in her eyes as though no one had asked her that question in a very long time. "Gracia," she said. "My name is Gracia." "Gracia," Darius repeated, testing the sound of it. "I am Darius." "I know," she said. "Everyone knows your name, the champion of the arena, the man who has never lost a bout." She paused, then added quietly, "The man who showed me mercy when he had no reason to." Silence fell between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Darius found himself acutely aware of how close she was standing, of the way the torchlight played across her features. She was beautiful in a way he had never expected to find an orc beautiful. There was strength in the line of her jaw, intelligence in her eyes, and a vulnerability in the way she held herself that made something protective stir in his chest. "You should not be here," he said finally. "If the guards find you, they will punish you, probably punish us both." "I know," Gracia said, "but I had to come, I had to thank you, and I had to ask you something." "What?" She took a step closer and he caught her scent, something earthy and clean like rain on stone. Her voice dropped even lower, barely above a whisper. "If they put me in the arena again, will you be there? Will you fight for me if they match us against others?" It was an impossible request, and they both knew it. Gladiators did not choose their opponents or their allies. The arena master decided everything, and after today's defiance, he would likely go out of his way to ensure Darius and Gracia never fought on the same side. But looking at her face, at the desperate hope barely contained there, Darius found himself nodding. "If I can, I will," he said. "I promise you that." The relief that washed over Gracia's features was so profound that it made Darius's throat tighten. She reached out as though to touch his arm, then seemed to think better of it and pulled her hand back. But the gesture had been made and something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, a connection. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Darius." Then she turned and fled down the corridor, her footsteps swift and nearly silent. Darius watched her go, watched the shadows swallow her up, and only when she was completely gone did he step back into his quarters and close the door. He returned to his cot but did not lie down. Instead, he sat there in the darkness, his mind racing with thoughts of amber eyes and green skin and a voice that carried both strength and sorrow. Something had changed tonight. He could feel it in his bones, in the rapid beating of his heart. He had spared many opponents over the years, had shown mercy when he could, but none of them had ever sought him out afterward. None of them had looked at him the way Gracia had, as though he were something more than just another killer in the arena. As though he mattered. Sleep finally claimed him in the small hours before dawn, and his dreams were filled with images of sand and blood and amber eyes watching him from the shadows. The next day brought no summons to the arena, which was unusual. Darius spent the morning exercising in his cell, keeping his body sharp, but his mind kept wandering to thoughts of Gracia. He wondered where she was, if she was safe, if the guards had discovered her midnight wandering. The uncertainty gnawed at him, and he found himself pacing like a caged animal. Midday came and went. A servant brought him food, but the man would not meet his eyes and hurried away as soon as the tray was delivered. That confirmed what Darius had suspected. The arena master was making him sweat, letting him stew in uncertainty as punishment for yesterday's defiance. It was a petty tactic, but an effective one. The not knowing was sometimes worse than facing actual punishment. It was late afternoon when his door finally opened and a guard stepped inside. The man was tall and scarred, one of the veteran soldiers who maintained order in the arena complex. "You are summoned," the guard said curtly. "The master wants to see you." Darius followed without protest, though his muscles tensed in anticipation. The arena master's quarters were on the upper level of the complex, in rooms that overlooked the sand where so much blood had been spilled. The guard led him through winding corridors and up several flights of stairs, finally stopping before an ornate wooden door. He knocked once, received a muffled command from within, and pushed the door open. The arena master sat behind a massive desk covered in scrolls and ledgers. He was a corpulent man named Gaius, with jowls that quivered when he spoke and small, piggish eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. He did not look up when Darius entered, continuing to scratch notes onto a piece of parchment with exaggerated concentration. "Sit," Gaius said after a long moment, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Darius sat. The guard remained by the door, hand resting on the pommel of his sword. The message was clear. This was not a friendly conversation. Gaius finally set down his quill and looked up, his piggy eyes fixing on Darius with an expression somewhere between annoyance and calculation. "You cost me a great deal of money yesterday," he said without preamble. "The crowd was promised a death. They paid for a death. Instead, they got a moral grandstanding and an unsatisfied bloodlust. Do you have any idea how many complaints I received?" "I invoked my right under the arena laws," Darius said calmly. "It was within the rules." "Barely," Gaius snapped. "And only because of some dusty old regulation that nobody has used in 30 years. You made me look weak, Keller. You made the games look soft. That is not something I take lightly." Darius said nothing, waiting. There was more coming, he could feel it. Gaius leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. His expression shifted, becoming almost thoughtful. "However," he continued, "I am a businessman, and I recognize that your little display of mercy has created an interesting opportunity. People are talking about you, about the gladiator who refused to kill. Some find it inspiring, others find it offensive, but everyone is talking, and that means interest, and interest means money." Darius felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He did not like where this was going. "I have decided to arrange a special bout," Gaius said, smiling now. "A redemption match, if you will. You and your orc friend will fight together against 4 opponents. If you win, I will grant both of you your freedom. If you lose, well, the problem solves itself." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 4 opponents was a suicide mission, even for a gladiator of Darius's skill. Adding an untrained fighter like Gracia to the equation made it nearly impossible. Gaius was not offering them a chance at freedom. He was offering them a spectacular public execution. "And if I refuse?" Darius asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then the orc girl fights alone tomorrow," Gaius said with a shrug. "Against opponents who will not be as merciful as you. She will die badly, Keller, painfully. And you will watch from the gladiator pits. Is that what you want?" Rage flared in Darius's chest, white-hot and consuming. But he forced it down, forced his expression to remain neutral. Gaius was baiting him, looking for an excuse to make things even worse. He would not give the man the satisfaction. When? Darius asked through clenched teeth. 5 days from now, Gaius said. That gives you time to train your little pet. I suggest you make the most of it. Dismissed. Darius rose and left the office, his mind already racing through possibilities and strategies. 5 days. It was not much time, but it was something. If he could train Gracia, if he could teach her even the basics of arena combat, they might have a chance. A slim one, but a chance nonetheless. The guard escorted him back to his quarters, but instead of locking him inside, the man gestured down a different corridor. The orc is in the training yard, the guard said. Master's orders. You have access to the yard and equipment until the bout. Do not try anything stupid. Darius nodded and headed in the direction indicated. The training yard was a large open space beneath the arena, with practice dummies, weapon racks, and a sand floor similar to the arena proper. It was where gladiators honed their skills between bouts, and it was usually crowded with fighters. But when Darius arrived, he found it empty except for a single figure standing in the center. Gracia turned at the sound of his footsteps. She wore the same gray tunic from last night, and her face looked drawn with worry. When she saw him, something like relief flickered in her eyes. They told me we are to fight together, she said. In 5 days, against 4 opponents. Yes, Darius confirmed, crossing the sand to stand before her. It is meant to be impossible. The arena master wants us dead, but he wants it to look like we had a chance. Then we are going to die, Gracia said flatly. Maybe, Darius admitted. But I do not intend to make it easy for him. We have 5 days to train, 5 days for me to teach you how to survive in that arena. Are you willing to learn? Gracia straightened her shoulders, and for the first time since meeting her, Darius saw a flash of the warrior she claimed to have been training to become. There was steel in her spine and determination in her eyes. Yes, she said. Teach me. They spent the rest of that day assessing Gracia's abilities. She was stronger than Darius expected, with good instincts for combat, but her technique was raw and unrefined. She knew how to swing a blade, but not how to conserve energy or read an opponent's movements. She was brave, but bravery without skill was just a fast path to death. Darius started with the basics. Footwork, balance, how to hold a weapon properly, how to parry, how to create openings in an opponent's defense. Gracia absorbed his teachings like a woman dying of thirst taking water. She was a quick learner. He had to give her that, and she did not complain even when he pushed her to the point of exhaustion. As the sun set and torches were lit around the training yard, Darius finally called a halt. Gracia sank to the ground, her chest heaving with exertion, sweat making her green skin glisten in the firelight. Darius fetched water and brought it to her, sitting down beside her as she drank greedily. You did well today, he said. Better than I expected. Gracia wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at him. There was something in her expression that Darius could not quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, something almost like wonder. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could have walked away. Let me fight alone. You might have negotiated your own freedom instead of tying yourself to my fate. Darius considered the question. It was one he had asked himself several times over the past day, and he still did not have a complete answer. But sitting there beside her, seeing the way the torchlight played across her features, feeling the warmth of her presence beside him, something clicked into place. Because I could not live with myself if I let you die alone, he said quietly. When I spared you in the arena, I took responsibility for you. Whether I meant to or not, I made your survival matter to me, and I do not abandon things that matter. Gracia stared at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face as though trying to determine if he was telling the truth. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and looked away. "No one has ever called me something that mattered before," she said softly. "In my clan, I was too small, too weak. They said I would never be a true warrior, and after I was captured, I was just property. Something to be used and discarded, but you look at me like I am a person, like I am worth saving." "You are," Darius said firmly. "And we are going to survive this, Gracia, both of us. I give you my word." She looked back at him, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadow of sadness that seemed to cling to her. For a moment, she looked almost happy. "I believe you," she whispered. They sat together in the flickering torchlight, side by side in the sand, and Darius felt that strange connection between them grow stronger. It was not just the bond between teacher and student, or between gladiators facing a common enemy. It was something more intimate, more profound. Something that frightened him with its intensity, even as it filled him with a warmth he had not felt in years. The 5 days that followed were a blur of training, sweat, and gradual transformation. Darius worked Gracia hard, pushing her to her limits and beyond, but she never complained. She met every challenge with grim determination, absorbing his lessons and putting them into practice with increasing skill. By the 3rd day, she could hold her own in basic sparring. By the 4th, she was anticipating his moves and creating counters, but the training was not just physical. In the brief rest periods between exercises, they talked. Darius learned about Gracia's life before the arena, about her clan in the northern mountains, about the human raid that had destroyed her village and killed her family. She had been captured at 17, sold at a slave market, and eventually ended up in the arena when her first owner decided she was too difficult to manage. In turn, Darius told her about his own past. He had been a soldier once, fighting in the wars along the southern border. But after his unit was betrayed by their own commanders and left to die, he had deserted. Unfortunately, he was caught and given a choice: execution or the arena. He had chosen the arena, and for the past 3 years, he had fought and killed and survived, always hoping that someday he might earn his freedom. "If we survive this bout," Gracia said on the evening of the 4th day, "if we win our freedom, what will you do?" Darius paused in the middle of cleaning his sword. He had not allowed himself to think much about life after the arena, had not wanted to hope for something that seemed so unlikely. But now, with the bout less than a day away, the question forced him to confront possibilities he had long since buried. "I would leave this city," he said slowly. "Go somewhere far from here, maybe the frontier where the world is still wild and unsettled. Find a piece of land and build something. A farm, maybe, something simple and clean far away from all this death." Gracia nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds peaceful." "What about you?" Darius asked. "What would you do with freedom?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and tinged with old pain. "I do not know if there is anywhere I could go," she said. "My clan is gone. Other orc tribes would not accept me after I have been among humans, and humans would never let me live peacefully among them. Perhaps freedom for someone like me is just a different kind of prison." The sadness in her voice made Darius's chest ache. He set down his sword and moved closer to her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Then come with me," he said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he realized he meant them with every fiber of his being. "Come to the frontier with me. We will build something together, a place where it does not matter what race we are, only that we are alive and free." Gracia turned to look at him, her amber eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that, take an orc with you, even knowing how others would react?" "Yes," Darius said simply. "I would if you will have me." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an emotion that neither of them had dared to name until this moment. Gracia reached out slowly, hesitantly, and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, slightly rough with calluses, and the simple touch sent a jolt through Darius's entire body. "I would like that," she whispered. "Very much." They sat like that for a long while, hands clasped, neither speaking. There was no need for words. Everything that mattered was contained in that simple touch, in the warmth of skin against skin, in the silent promise passing between them. Tomorrow they would fight for their lives. Tomorrow they would face 4 trained killers in front of a bloodthirsty crowd. But tonight, in the quiet of the training yard, they had this moment. And it was enough. The day of the bout arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine, a beautiful day that seemed to mock the violence about to unfold. Darius woke early, his body tense with anticipation and his mind already running through strategies and scenarios. He performed his usual pre-fight rituals, the stretches and exercises that prepared his muscles for combat, but his thoughts kept drifting to Gracia. They brought her to the preparation room an hour before the bout. She wore armor now, proper fitted pieces that actually protected her vital areas, and she carried a sword that had been balanced for her weight and reach. Darius had insisted on proper equipment, had threatened to refuse to fight if Gaius tried to send her in with inadequate gear, and surprisingly, the arena master had complied. Probably because he wanted the fight to at least look fair for the crowd. Gracia's face was set in determined lines, but Darius could see the fear lurking behind her eyes. He crossed to her and placed his hands on her shoulders, waiting until she met his gaze. "Remember what I taught you," he said quietly. "Stay close to me. Watch for my signals. Conserve your energy and do not take unnecessary risks. We work together and we survive together. Understood?" "Understood," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "Good." Darius squeezed her shoulders gently. "I need you to trust me out there, Gracia, completely. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I trust you with my life, Darius." The words settled something in his chest, a knot of tension he had not even realized he was carrying. He nodded and released her, stepping back to collect his own weapons. A short sword and a dagger, his preferred combination. Light enough for speed, deadly enough to end fights quickly. The roar of the crowd filtered down to them, a distant thunder that grew louder as fight time approached. Guards came to collect them, leading them through the familiar corridors toward the arena entrance. Darius had walked this path dozens of times, but it had never felt quite like this. The stakes had never been so high, the outcome so uncertain. They paused at the gate that would open onto the sand. Through the iron bars, Darius could see the arena floor, bright with sunlight. He could hear the announcer's voice booming across the space, working the crowd into a frenzy. "Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the Empire, we have a special treat for you today." The champion Darius Keller, who dared to show mercy in this sacred arena, will now prove whether his compassion was wisdom or weakness. He fights alongside the orc he spared against 4 of our finest gladiators. Will mercy triumph, or will justice be served? Let us find out. The gate opened, and Darius stepped out onto the sand with Gracia at his side. The crowd's roar washed over them like a physical force, a wall of sound that was almost overwhelming. Darius scanned the stands, seeing the bloodlust on thousands of faces, and felt a cold rage settle in his gut. These people wanted them to die. They had paid good money to watch 2 lives end in brutal fashion. He would be damned if he gave them that satisfaction. Across the arena, the opposite gate opened and their opponents emerged. 4 men, all veteran gladiators that Darius recognized. Marcus the Butcher, a massive brute who favored a war axe. Twin brothers named Cain and Abel who fought with sword and shield in perfect synchronization. And Silas the Snake, a wiry man with a spear who was known for his speed and precision. They were all killers, all survivors, all men who would show no mercy. The announcer's voice rang out again. Combatants, take your positions. The bout begins at the sound of the horn. Darius moved to the center of the arena, Gracia staying close to his left side just as they had practiced. He could feel her tension, the coiled readiness in her body, and he drew strength from her presence. They were in this together. They would win or die together. The horn sounded. The 4 gladiators advanced, spreading out to surround them. It was a classic tactic, meant to divide their attention and create multiple angles of attack. But Darius had anticipated this. He had drilled the counter into Gracia over and over during their training. Back to back, he commanded, and Gracia immediately pressed her back against his. Now they could see in all directions, and their opponents could not get behind them without being exposed. Marcus charged first, his war axe whistling through the air in a powerful overhead strike. Darius shoved Gracia to the side and rolled in the opposite direction, letting the axe crash into the sand where they had been standing. He came up in a crouch and lashed out with his sword, scoring a shallow cut across Marcus's thigh. The big man roared in pain and anger, swinging his axe in a wild horizontal arc. Darius ducked beneath it and retreated, drawing Marcus away from Gracia. Behind him, he heard the clang of metal on metal and knew Gracia was engaging one of the others. He wanted to look, to make sure she was all right, but he could not afford the distraction. Marcus was pressing forward, his axe strikes coming faster now, more controlled. The man was angry but not stupid, and Darius had to focus all his attention on avoiding that deadly blade. They circled each other, trading blows and testing for openings. Darius was faster, but Marcus had longer reach and more power. A single solid hit from that axe would end the fight. Darius needed to get inside his guard, needed to turn this into close quarters combat where his speed would be the deciding factor. A shout from Gracia made his heart skip a beat. He risked a glance and saw her locked in combat with Cain, one of the twin brothers. She was holding her own, her movements showing the training Darius had drilled into her, but Abel was circling around, looking for an opening to strike. And beyond them, Silas the Snake was advancing with his spear leveled, ready to skewer whichever of them showed weakness first. They were being overwhelmed, picked apart piece by piece. Darius had to change the dynamic of the fight, had to do something unexpected. Marcus swung his axe in another overhead strike, putting all his weight behind it. Instead of dodging, Darius stepped forward and inside the arc of the weapon. The axe handle crashed against his shoulder, a glancing blow that sent pain shooting down his arm, but it kept the blade from reaching him. And now, he was too close for Marcus to use his weapon effectively. Darius drove his dagger up and under Marcus's ribs, feeling the blade slide between bone and sink deep into vital organs. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock, and he tried to bring his axe around for a desperate strike. But Darius twisted the dagger and pulled it free, then slashed his sword across the big man's throat. Blood sprayed across the sand, and Marcus fell, his body twitching in its death throes. 1 down, 3 to go, but there was no time to celebrate. Darius spun around and saw Abel moving in behind Gracia while she was engaged with Cain. The coward was going to stab her in the back. Rage exploded in Darius's chest, lending speed to his limbs. He sprinted across the sand and intercepted Abel's sword strike with his own blade, the impact jarring his arm. Abel's eyes widened in surprise, and Darius used that moment of shock to kick the man's legs out from under him. Abel fell hard, his shield flying from his grasp. "Gracia, finish Cain." Darius shouted, then focused on Abel. The gladiator was scrambling to his feet, but Darius was faster. He knocked Abel's sword aside and drove his blade through the man's neck, severing the spine. Abel died instantly, his body going limp, 2 down. Darius turned to help Gracia with Cain, but she did not need it. While Cain was distracted by his brother's death, Gracia had pressed her attack with surprising ferocity. She forced him back with a flurry of strikes, then caught him off balance and slammed her sword through his chest. Cain staggered, blood bubbling from his lips, and fell 3 down. That left only Silas the snake, and he was backing away now, his spear held defensively. The crowd was in an uproar, their cheers and jeers creating a deafening wall of noise. Darius could not tell if they were pleased or outraged by how the fight was going. He did not care. All that mattered was finishing this. Darius and Gracia advanced together, moving in the coordinated pattern they had practiced. Silas was dangerous, his spear giving him reach and his speed making him difficult to pin down. But he was also alone now, facing 2 opponents, and the fear in his eyes was evident. "Surrender," Darius called out. "You do not have to die today." Silas's response was to lunge forward, his spear aimed at Gracia's heart. But she sidestepped exactly as Darius had taught her, letting the spear slide past, and Darius moved in from the other side. Silas tried to pull his spear back for another strike, but Gracia grabbed the shaft and held it firm. For a moment, Silas struggled against her strength, but it was futile. Gracia was stronger than she looked, and the moment of resistance gave Darius the opening he needed. He stepped in and drove his sword through Silas's side, angling up to pierce the heart. Silas gasped, his grip on the spear going slack, and then he slumped forward. Darius caught him and lowered him to the sand, watching the life fade from his eyes. 4 down. Silence fell over the arena, broken only by the sound of Darius and Gracia's heavy breathing. They stood in the center of the sand, surrounded by bodies, their armor and skin splattered with blood. Darius looked at Gracia and saw the same disbelief on her face that he felt. They had done it. Against all odds, they had survived. The crowd erupted. Half of them were cheering, celebrating the unexpected victory and the spectacle they had witnessed. The other half were shouting in outrage, angry that the underdogs had prevailed. But the outcome was clear. By the laws of the arena, by Gaius's own declaration, Darius and Gracia had won their freedom. Gaius himself appeared in the arena master's box, his face purple with barely contained rage. But he was trapped by his own words, by the promise he had made in front of thousands of witnesses. To renege now would destroy his reputation and his business. Slowly, with visible reluctance, he raised his hand in the traditional gesture of freedom granted. "The victors are freed," his voice boomed across the arena, magically amplified. "By right of combat and by my word, Darius Keller and the orc Gracia are released from service. Let no man bar their way." The crowd's response was mixed, but Darius barely heard it. He turned to Gracia and saw tears streaming down her face, cutting clean lines through the blood and dirt. She was shaking, her sword falling from nerveless fingers, and Darius caught her as her legs gave out. He held her upright, his arms wrapping around her, and felt her bury her face against his chest. "We did it," she sobbed. "We are free. We are actually free." "Yes," Darius whispered, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "We are free." Guards approached to escort them from the arena, but these were different guards, not the brutal enforcers who treated gladiators like animals, but ceremonial escorts there to honor freed fighters. It was a bizarre transition, being treated like people instead of property, and Darius found himself almost disoriented by it. They were taken to a preparation room where servants helped them remove their armor and clean the blood from their skin. Fresh clothes were provided, simple but clean, and a purse of coins that represented their winnings from the bout. It was not much, but it was enough to buy supplies and passage out of the city. Through it all, Darius kept Gracia close, his hand finding hers and holding tight. She seemed equally reluctant to let him go, as though afraid that if they separated even for a moment, this whole thing would prove to be a dream, and they would wake back in their cells. As the sun began to set, they were finally led to the arena's main entrance and released onto the streets. The guards removed their hands, stepped back, and simply watched as Darius and Gracia walked through the gates as free people for the first time in years. The city streets stretched before them, crowded with evening traffic and lit by the warm glow of lanterns. Darius paused just outside the arena gates, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him like a physical thing. Behind them lay years of blood and death and captivity. Ahead lay everything, every possibility, every choice. Where do we go? Gracia asked softly, her hand still clasped in his. Darius looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had faced death beside him and emerged victorious. He thought about the promises they had made to each other in the quiet of the training yard, about farms on the frontier and a life free from prejudice and violence. "Away from here," he said. "As far and as fast as we can. There is a caravan leaving for the frontier settlements tomorrow morning. If we can reach it, we can disappear into the wilderness and start over." "Together?" Gracia asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice, a need for reassurance. "Together," Darius confirmed. "Always together." They walked through the city streets as night fell, two figures moving through the crowds with purpose and determination. They found an inn on the outskirts of town, a shabby place that asked no questions and took their coin without comment. The innkeeper's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Gracia, but the sight of Darius's sword and the hard look in his eyes convinced the man to keep his thoughts to himself. The room was small and sparse, with a single bed and a wash basin, but to Darius it felt like a palace. It was the first time in 3 years he had slept in a real bed as a free man. He sat on the edge of the mattress and felt exhaustion crash over him like a wave. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day was finally fading, leaving behind only weariness and the dull ache of various wounds. Gracia stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She had been quiet since they left the arena, lost in her own thoughts, and Darius wondered what she was feeling. Freedom was a strange thing when you had been without it for so long. Sometimes it felt more frightening than comfortable. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Gracia turned from the window, and in the dim lamplight he could see tears on her face again. But she was smiling, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up," she said. "That this is some cruel dream and I will open my eyes to find myself back in that cell, waiting for the guards to drag me to the arena." "It is real," Darius assured her. "We are free, Gracia. No one owns us anymore." She crossed to the bed and sat beside him, so close their legs touched. She reached out and took his hand again, that simple gesture that had come to mean so much to both of them. "I owe you my life," she said quietly. "Twice over now. I do not know how I could ever repay that debt." "There is no debt," Darius said firmly. "We saved each other today. Without your strength and your courage, I would have died on that sand. We are equals in this, Gracia." "Partners. Partners," she repeated, testing the word. Then she looked up at him, her amber eyes intense in the lamplight. "Darius, I need to tell you something. Something I have been feeling since that first night when you spared my life." Darius's heart began to beat faster. He knew what was coming, could feel it in the air between them, and the knowledge both thrilled and terrified him. "You do not have to say anything," he began, but Gracia shook her head. "Yes, I do, because I do not know what tomorrow will bring, and I refuse to leave things unsaid between us." She took a deep breath. "I think I am falling in love with you. I know it is foolish. I know that a human and an orc can never truly be together in this world, but I cannot help what I feel. You are the first person who ever looked at me and saw worth, who treated me with kindness and respect, who risked everything to give me a chance at life. How could I not fall in love with you?" The words hung in the air, raw and honest and beautiful. Darius found himself unable to speak for a moment, his throat tight with emotion. He had not expected this, had not allowed himself to hope for it, but now that it was spoken aloud, he realized he had been feeling the same thing. "Gracia," he said, his voice rough. "I have been fighting beside people for most of my life. I have had comrades and allies and brothers in arms. But I have never felt for any of them what I feel for you. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of the faith you have shown in me. And yes, I know the world will not accept us. I know that what we feel for each other is considered wrong by both humans and orcs, but I do not care anymore. I am done living my life according to what others think I should do or feel. If falling in love with you is wrong, then I will gladly be wrong, because you are the best thing that has happened to me in years." Gracia's face crumpled, and she let out a sob that was half laugh and half cry. She threw her arms around Darius's neck and held him tight, and he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. They held each other like that for a long time, both of them shaking with the force of their emotions, both of them clinging to this moment of perfect honesty and connection. When they finally pulled apart, Gracia cupped Darius's face in her hands and leaned in slowly. Her lips brushed against his, gentle and tentative, asking permission. Darius answered by kissing her back, deeper and more confident. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be. Sweet and passionate, tender and fierce all at once. When they broke apart, both of them were breathless. "I love you," Gracia whispered. "I love you, Darius Keller." "I love you too," Darius whispered back. "And I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving me your heart." They spent that night holding each other, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future, occasionally stealing kisses and touches that spoke of growing desire, but also of respect and restraint. There would be time for more later, when they were safely away from this city and its dangers. For now, it was enough to simply be together, to feel the warmth of each other's presence and the security of newfound love. Morning came too quickly. They rose with the sun and gathered their few possessions, then made their way to the city's northern gate where the frontier caravan was assembling. It was a large group, perhaps 30 wagons loaded with supplies and settlers eager to try their luck in the unsettled lands beyond the empire's borders. The caravan master was a grizzled old man named Derek Kane, and he looked at Gracia with obvious suspicion. "No orcs," he said flatly. "We have got enough trouble on the frontier without inviting it along." Darius stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt in what he hoped was a casual but meaningful gesture. "She is with me," he said quietly. "We are traveling together and we have coin to pay our way. Unless you want to turn away paying customers." Derek looked between them, his eyes shrewd and calculating. Finally, he spat into the dust and shrugged. "Your coin is as good as anyone's, I suppose, but the first sign of trouble from her and you are both out. Understood?" "Understood," Darius agreed, though the words made his jaw clench. They paid their passage and were assigned to ride in one of the supply wagons near the middle of the caravan. The other travelers gave them a wide berth, shooting suspicious looks at Gracia and whispering behind their hands. Darius ignored them all, focusing instead on getting Gracia settled and comfortable for the long journey ahead. The caravan set out mid-morning, the wagons rolling through the city gates and onto the northern road. Darius watched the city walls recede behind them and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. With every mile they traveled, the arena and its horrors grew more distant. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. The journey to the frontier took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled through farmland and forest, past small villages and across wide rivers. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Darius and Gracia would ride in their wagon during the day, talking and learning more about each other, and at night they would make camp with the caravan. Some of the other travelers gradually warmed to them, seeing that Gracia was not the savage they had expected, but many remained hostile and suspicious. There were a few tense moments. One night, a drunk settler tried to start a fight with Gracia, shouting slurs and insults. Darius had stepped between them, his hand on his sword, and the cold look in his eyes had convinced the drunk to back down. Another time, they heard some of the younger men plotting to teach the orc a lesson, while they thought no one was listening. Darius had confronted them directly, making it very clear that anyone who touched Gracia would answer to him. After that, the troublemakers kept their distance through it all. Gracia remained dignified and calm, refusing to be provoked or to show fear. Darius's admiration for her only grew. She was stronger than he had realized, not just physically but emotionally. She bore the weight of prejudice and hatred without letting it break her spirit, and that strength inspired him. As they traveled deeper into the frontier, the landscape began to change. The forests grew denser, the hills steeper. The road became little more than a rutted track, and settlements grew sparse and far between. This was wild country, untamed and dangerous, but also beautiful in a way that took Darius's breath away. Wide valleys stretched between mountain ranges, rivers ran clear and cold, and the sky seemed bigger here, more open. Finally, after 3 long weeks, the caravan reached its destination. A small frontier settlement called Riverbend, built where a wide river curved around a natural plateau. It was barely more than a collection of wooden buildings and tents, with perhaps 200 residents, but it represented the edge of civilization. Beyond here, there was only wilderness. Darius and Gracia disembarked from the wagon and stood looking at the settlement. It was rough and primitive, nothing like the cities they had left behind, but something about it felt right. This was a place where they could disappear, where their past did not matter and they could build a new life from scratch. "This is it," Darius said. "This is where we start over." Gracia nodded, her eyes scanning the settlement with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Do you think they will accept us here?" "I think they will not have much choice," Darius said with a slight smile. "Out here, survival matters more than prejudice. If we prove ourselves useful, they will tolerate us. And eventually, tolerance can become acceptance." They spent their first few days in Riverbend getting the lay of the land. The settlement was led by a woman named Deanna Ashton, a former soldier who had taken a land grant and come west to start fresh. She was a hard woman, but fair, and she seemed to judge people by their actions rather than their race. When Darius explained that he and Gracia were looking to homestead nearby, Deanna pointed them toward unclaimed land about 5 miles upriver. "It is good land," she said. "Rich soil, plenty of water sheltered by hills, but it is isolated. You would be on your own out there with no neighbors close by. Can you handle that?" "We can," Darius assured her. We are both used to hardship and we are not afraid of hard work. Diana looked at Gracia, her expression unreadable. What about you, Orc? Can you farm? Gracia lifted her chin, meeting the woman's gaze without flinching. I can learn, and I am strong. I will not be a burden. Something like respect flickered in Diana's eyes. She nodded slowly. All right then. File your claim with me and the land is yours. But understand, out here we do not tolerate troublemakers. You keep to yourselves, work hard, and do not cause problems, and we will get along fine. Step out of line and we will handle it our own way. Clear, clear, Darius and Gracia said together. They filed their claim, paying the small fee required, and received a crude map showing the boundaries of their new property. Then they purchased supplies. Axes, saws, nails, seeds, and all the other tools they would need to build a homestead. It took most of their remaining coin, but Darius did not regret it. This was an investment in their future. The next morning they set out for their land. They walked along the river, following the map, and after a few hours they reached the spot Diana had indicated. It was even better than Darius had hoped. A broad meadow sloped gently down to the river, with a clear spring bubbling up near the tree line. The hills rose behind, providing shelter from northern winds, and the soil was dark and rich when he dug his fingers into it. This is perfect, Darius breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Gracia stood beside him, her hand finding his. She looked out at the land, at the river and the meadow and the distant mountains, and a slow smile spread across her face. This is ours, she said wonderingly. All of this, our home. Our home, Darius agreed. Let us build it together. They spent the rest of that day planning where to place the house to catch the morning sun and avoid the worst of winter winds, where to dig the well, where to plant the first crops. It was overwhelming, the sheer amount of work that lay ahead, but also exciting. Every decision they made was theirs to make, every mistake theirs to learn from. They were building something from nothing, and it felt glorious. As the sun set, they made a simple camp by the spring. Darius built a fire and they ate a meal of dried meat and bread, sitting close together as the stars emerged overhead. The wilderness around them was alive with sounds. The rush of the river, the chirp of insects, the distant howl of wolves. It should have been frightening, but instead it felt peaceful, natural. Darius, Gracia said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Are you happy? He looked at her, at the firelight playing across her green skin, at the contentment in her amber eyes. The question struck him as profound because until that moment he had not fully realized the truth of his answer. Yes, he said simply. I am happy. For the first time in years I am truly happy. Gracia smiled and leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Good. Because I am happy too. Happier than I ever thought possible. They sat like that until the fire burned down to embers, wrapped in each other's warmth and the certainty that they had found something precious. Not just land or freedom, but each other. And that was worth more than all the gold in the empire. The weeks that followed were filled with backbreaking labor. They cut down trees and hauled logs to build the frame of their house. They dug a well, striking water at 20 feet. They cleared the meadow for planting and built a small barn for the animals they hoped to eventually acquire. Every day brought new challenges and small victories, and every night they collapsed into their bedrolls exhausted but satisfied. Slowly, their homestead took shape. The house was small, just 2 rooms, but it was solid and well built. The roof did not leak, the walls kept out the wind, and there was a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the winter. They built furniture from rough-hewn wood, a table, chairs, a bed frame. Gracia proved to be surprisingly skilled at weaving, and she made sleeping mats and blankets from river reeds and wool they traded for in Riverbend. As autumn approached, They planted a late crop of turnips and cabbage, and they began smoking fish from the river to store for winter. Darius also hunted, bringing down deer and rabbits that provided both meat and hides. Gracia learned to tan the hides and fashion them into clothing and blankets. They were becoming self-sufficient, building a life that depended on no one but each other. The people of Riverbend remained wary of them, but as the weeks passed and no trouble arose, the hostility gradually eased into indifference. A few of the more friendly settlers even stopped by their homestead to trade goods or offer advice on frontier living. Deanna Ashton visited once, ostensibly to check on their progress, but Darius suspected she was also ensuring they were not causing problems. She seemed satisfied with what she saw. "You are doing good work here," she told them as she prepared to leave. "Better than some of the other settlers, to be honest. You have got a good piece of land and you are making the most of it. Keep it up." After she left, Gracia turned to Darius with a grin. "We have the settlement leader's approval. That is something, at least." "It is everything," Darius corrected. "If Deanna accepts us, others will follow her lead. We are becoming part of this community, Gracia. Slowly, but it is happening." As autumn deepened and the first frosts touched the meadow, Darius began to think about the future in more concrete terms. They had built a home, established a homestead, and earned a measure of acceptance from their neighbors. But there was one more thing he wanted, one more step to make their bond permanent and recognized. He wanted to marry Gracia. The thought had been growing in his mind for weeks, but he had not spoken it aloud, unsure how she would react. Marriage between a human and an orc was unheard of, possibly even illegal in some places. But out here on the frontier, the old rules held less sway. People made their own customs, lived by their own codes. If they declared themselves married, who was there to say otherwise? One evening as they sat by their fire, Gracia mending a shirt and Darius carving a bowl from wood, he finally found the courage to broach the subject. "Gracia, I want to ask you something important." She looked up from her sewing, her expression curious. "What is it?" Darius set down his carving and turned to face her fully. His heart was pounding and he felt as nervous as he had before any arena bout. "I want us to be married," he said. "I know it is not traditional, and I know there may not be any priest willing to perform the ceremony, but I want to make a formal commitment to you. I want the world to know that you are my wife and I am your husband. I want us to be a family in every sense of the word." Gracia's eyes went wide and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then tears began to stream down her face and she set aside her sewing and launched herself at Darius, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, I want that too. I want to be your wife more than anything." Relief and joy flooded through Darius, and he held her tight, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. When she finally pulled back, her face was alight with happiness despite the tears. "How do we do it?" she asked. "If no priest will marry us, how do we make it official?" "We make it official ourselves," Darius said. "Out here, a marriage is what two people declare it to be. We will make our vows to each other in front of witnesses. That will be enough." They spent the next few days preparing. Darius carved a pair of simple wooden rings, smooth and polished, that they would exchange as symbols of their commitment. Gracia wove a garland of late-season wildflowers to wear in her hair. And they sent word to Riverbend, inviting anyone who wished to attend to come to their homestead for the ceremony. Darius had not expected many to show up, but he was pleasantly surprised. Deanna Ashton came, along with about a dozen other settlers. They gathered in the meadow before the house on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sky brilliant blue and the leaves on the trees turning gold and red. Darius and Gracia stood facing each other, holding hands, with the gathered settlers watching. There was no priest, no formal officiant, so Darius took it upon himself to speak the words that mattered. "Gracia," he said, his voice clear and strong. "When I met you, I was a man who had forgotten how to hope. I lived in darkness, doing violence because I knew nothing else. But you showed me light. You reminded me that there is more to life than survival, that there is kindness and courage and love. You have been my partner, my friend, and my salvation. Today, I vow before all these witnesses that I will be your husband. I will stand by you through hardship and joy, through lean times and plenty. I will protect you, provide for you, and love you for all the days of my life. This I swear." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. Gracia took a shaky breath, tears already flowing freely down her cheeks. When she spoke, her voice was thick with feeling. "Darius, you gave me back my life, not just once, but over and over again. You saw worth in me when no one else did. You fought for me, believed in me, and loved me when the world said we could not be together. Today, I vow before all these witnesses that I will be your wife. I will stand by you through every storm and every sunrise. I will work beside you, laugh with you, and grow old with you. I will love you with everything I am for all the days of my life. This I swear." She slipped the other wooden ring onto his finger, her hand steady despite her tears. They stood there for a moment, rings exchanged and vows spoken, looking into each other's eyes with a depth of feeling that needed no words. Then Darius leaned forward and kissed his wife, sealing their commitment before witnesses and the wide frontier sky. The gathered settlers applauded, and even Diana Ashton was smiling. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate weddings held in the cities, but it was real and honest and true. That made it more meaningful than any grand spectacle could have been. After the ceremony, they shared food and drink with their guests. It was a modest celebration, but the mood was warm and genuine. People who had been standoffish before seemed to soften, treating Darius and Gracia with more friendliness and respect. By choosing to publicly commit to each other, by declaring their love openly, they had earned something precious. Not just acceptance, but a place in the community. As the sun set and the guests departed, Darius and Gracia stood together at the edge of their meadow, watching the last of the settlers disappear down the path toward Riverbend. Gracia leaned against her husband, and Darius wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "We built a life together, a real life." "We did," Darius agreed. "And this is just the beginning, Gracia. We have many years ahead of us. Many adventures and challenges and joys. I cannot wait to experience all of them with you." Gracia turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, she smiled up at him with such love and contentment that it made his heart ache in the best possible way. "Take me inside, husband," she said. "I want to spend our wedding night in our home, in our bed, with no more doubts or fears between us. Just love." Darius lifted her in his arms, making her laugh in surprise, and carried her across the threshold of their home. He kicked the door closed behind them, shutting out the world and everything in it. Tonight, there was only the two of them, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. Winter came to the frontier with howling winds and deep snow. But inside their small house, Darius and Gracia were warm and content. They had stockpiled enough food to see them through the cold months, and they spent the long evenings by the fire, talking and planning and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a peaceful time, a time of consolidation and quiet happiness. When spring arrived, they planted their first full crop: wheat and barley, vegetables and herbs. Darius also traded for a pair of goats and some chickens, giving them fresh milk and eggs. The homestead was truly thriving now, and their work was beginning to pay real dividends. But more important than material success was the life they had built together. Darius woke every morning beside his wife, worked beside her every day, and fell asleep in her arms every night. It was a simple life, far removed from the violence and spectacle of the arena, and it was everything he had ever wanted. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains, Gracia placed Darius's hand on her belly and gave him a shy smile. "There is something I need to tell you," she said softly. Darius looked at her, then down at where his hand rested, and sudden understanding flooded through him. His eyes went wide. "Are you?" "Yes," Gracia confirmed, her smile growing wider. "I am with child, our child." "You are going to be a father, Darius." Joy exploded in Darius's chest, so powerful and overwhelming that for a moment he could not breathe. He pulled Gracia into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair, his whole body shaking with the force of his emotion. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Gracia, I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I am so happy, Darius, so incredibly happy." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, as the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. They had come so far from that blood-soaked arena, from the moment when Darius had lowered his sword and chosen mercy over murder. That single choice had set them on a path that led here, to this moment, to a future filled with more promise and possibility than either had dared to imagine. The gladiator had spared the orc girl in the arena, and that night when she came to his quarters, he had made a choice that changed both their lives. Together they had fought for freedom, traveled to the frontier, built a home and found love. Now they would raise a family, proving to the world that compassion and courage could overcome prejudice and hate. As Darius held his wife and thought about the child growing inside her, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Every step of their journey had been worth it. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt had led them here, to happiness, to love, to a future they would build together one day at a time. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the joy and hope of two people who had defied the odds and found something precious. Something worth fighting for, something worth living for, each other.